Hello and welcome to my channel, Rhino here. Today I'm looking at a video that is rather something. It's called Proof Evolution is a Fraud, but he only barely touches on evolution just a little tiny bit, and there are so many non sequiturs. I'm not sure where this guy thought he was going with it or why he thought it made a good proof of evolutionary fraud, but it's fun, so let's go.
God said, "And let them be for lights in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth." And it was so. Isn't that beautiful? You know, God created the sun. I mean, you just think of the sun. God created this great ball of fire in the sky, put it in a perfect spot, not too close where we'd burn up, not too far away where we'd freeze to death. In a perfect spot.
If this is supposed to be the teleological argument, that's not a very good aspect of it for several reasons. Firstly, the habitable zone idea is all about where water could exist as a liquid and therefore enable abiogenesis, which is probably against your doctrine if you're a young Earth creationist. Distance away from a star is only one factor which would determine where water could exist on the surface as a liquid, but there are other places that liquid water could exist, and therefore that life could potentially have started, such as Europa, where it's definitely too far away from the sun to support liquid water on its surface, but tidal flexing with Jupiter creates enough heat to keep the water under the ice crust surface in a liquid state, potentially providing an environment in which life could develop. It's also possible that life could develop in another liquid medium, such as ammonia, which would have a completely different habitable zone. There's also the vast size of the universe to take into account. With our study of exoplanets, we've discovered that most stars have planets. Further study has demonstrated that an estimated 25% of them have planets in the star's habitable zone, that is habitable to us. So this suggests that Earth really isn't this rare miracle, but just a product of the numbers. Essentially, it all boils down to us looking at the environment that we adapted and evolved to survive in, and saying that it's amazing how adapted we are to our environment. It's like that classic example of a puddle somehow gaining sentience and declaring how amazing it is that the hole it's in was perfectly designed to be the exact shape as the puddle.
You know what's amazing to me? You know, evolution is like an atheist's Bible. You take away my Bible, you beat me. I'm sorry. But if you take away an atheist's evolution, that's their Bible. That's all they have.
Really? Well, if evolution really is all that atheists have, then there definitely wouldn't have been any atheists before 1859 when Darwin first published his theory, right? That's why ancient Greece had a death penalty for atheism, right? Surely it makes sense to have a penalty for a crime that nobody would even think of committing in the first place because evolution hadn't been discovered yet. And the small number of openly professed atheists would, of course, have nothing to do with the fact that being an open atheist would lead to being killed by theists for the vast majority of the history of Western civilization. And, of course, all this isn't even touching on Eastern civilization, which had atheistic religion for thousands of years in Buddhism, Jainism, Taoism, some sects of Hinduism. But yeah, atheists have nothing without a theory that wasn't discovered until 160 years ago, despite atheists having a rich history across multiple cultures over thousands of years.
And isn't it amazing that all scientists will say is, oh, yeah, they come out and they just openly say, oh, yeah, the sun is burning up 250 tons a second.
I'm not sure where you're getting your numbers from, because if you're trying to be impressive, the real numbers work a lot better in this case. It's not 250 tons per second. It's actually closer to 600 million tons per second.
But at the constant that the sun is burning, within just 100 years, you do know that, or a million years.
I see you also have trouble with zeros. They've done me in occasionally as well. My sympathies.
You know, a million years just seems crazy. But that's how evolutionists are. They're like little magicians. You know, you got to bring out the big numbers, try to be impressive, you know.
So are you saying that the large numbers are just scientists trying to be impressive? That seems a bit, well, stupid if you ask me. I mean, if scientists were trying to push an agenda to supplant religion, if they were choosing arbitrary numbers to try and be impressive, they probably would have chosen smaller numbers in order to be more convincing. 100,000 years is much easier for our human brains to understand than millions or billions of years, but it's still impressively large. The reason we pull out these ridiculously large numbers, like millions and billions of years, is because that's where the evidence points.
But even though it's kind of illogical. But, you know, just 1 million years ago, the sun would have completely engulfed the Earth.
I hate you. You're making me do math. Okay, so the sun today has a mass of 2 octillion tons, or a 2 with 27 zeros after it, 2 times 10 to the 27th. The current radius of the sun, that is the distance from the center of the sun to the surface, is 695,508 kilometers. The sun burns 600 million tons of hydrogen every second for a total of 1.89 times 10 to the 16th tons every year. Multiply that by 1,000,000 and we have 1.89 times 10 to the 22nd tons of hydrogen burned every million years. Divide that by the mass, and we get 0.000945% of the sun's mass lost over the last million years. Now, with some really dirty shortcuts that are sure to put me on any mathematician or astrophysicist's bad side, we find that an increase in radius of 0.000945% leaves us with a radius of 696,165 kilometers, for a difference of 657 kilometers. For comparison, the distance to Mercury from the Sun is 57,900,000 kilometers, so not quite big enough a distance to have enveloped the Earth. Oh, and what's this? Turns out all my math is wrong because the hydrogen that I said is burned isn't really burned, it's fused into helium. Now, helium is more dense than hydrogen, so the same amount of helium, the same mass of helium would take up a smaller physical space, so the sun would have been larger in the past, and yes, some mass is lost to the whole E equals mc squared thing, and good thing for that too, or we wouldn't be here to discuss it, but we're talking about a star that is billions of years old here. There's not going to be much of a change when looking at the millions of years timescale.
That's a scientific fact. And they're just now figuring that, they're like, whoa, what do we do with this? But they won't tell it to people because they don't want to admit they're wrong.
I am definitely open to the idea that I messed up my math. It's happened in the past, it will happen in the future, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if it happened in this video. But I did the math giving you the benefit of the doubt and using a much higher burn rate than what you gave because you gave the wrong one. And I found that the sun would not have been large enough that the Earth would have been engulfed. All these numbers are out there for anyone to find, and if you ask an actual astrophysicist to show you how the numbers work, I'm sure they'd be willing to if they had the time. Scientists generally care about education, and if you go to them sincerely looking for answers, rather than just trying to give them gotcha questions, most would be willing to help teach. So no, there is no grand conspiracy of scientists giving out these large numbers for how fast the sun fuses hydrogen, but at the same time trying to hide that this means the sun can't be millions of years old. That would be dumb, and they would have been found out by now. At this point, science has progressed to a point where if you were to come along and disprove something as basic as how old the sun is, you would probably win a Nobel Prize, which also comes with a hefty cash award, probably about a bit over $1 million, not to mention the prestige of being able to call yourself a Nobel laureate. Basically, all the incentive would push scientists towards blowing the whistle on the conspiracy rather than continuing it. And the conspiracy would have to be so massive as to be statistically impossible. There were, in 2013, about 70,000 astrophysicists. These are people whose job it is to study the physics of outer space, and every single one of them relies on the universe being billions of years old in order to do their job. And that's not even touching on the several other fields, each with thousands of their own scientists who all rely on old ages in their daily work. They would all have to be in on this massive secret. It's just not plausible.
But the sun is actually burning at a constant, and it's burning further and further down. So just 1 million years ago, do you realize our Earth would have been completely engulfed by the sun?
Yeah, I'm gonna need to see your source for that. The closest I could find was an article from the Institute for Creation Research claiming that the sun is shrinking at a rate of 0.1% of its diameter per century, but that was relying heavily on a paper from 1979, which itself was relying heavily on accurate astronomical measurements from the 1800s, and there's another paper from 1988 which examines the errors in measurements that would have resulted from using the micrometers that they had access to back in the 1800s, as well as the calibration techniques they would have used, but none of them make any mention of the rate at which the sun burns hydrogen. Was that a number that you just threw in there to try and sound impressive? And tellingly, in the ICR article, they come right out and say that they're assuming the sun shrinks at a constant rate. What reason they have for that assumption when the sources they were using were largely debating whether the sun shrinks and grows in cycles of 11, 80, or even into the thousands of years is beyond me. And in addition to all that, the original sun shrinking article mentions several times that the data they're basing their paper on could be faulty, and even if it is accurate, they make it very clear that the shrinking is temporary and does not apply to the whole solar mass.
Oh no, but it's logical to believe in evolution. I think the Earth's millions of years old. You're an idiot.
You always know you're dealing with true class when a person speaking calls their hypothetical opponent an idiot based on bad math done with faulty assumptions. Besides which, I'm pretty sure the Bible prohibits you from insulting people. You know, like in Matthew 5:22, where it says, "But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council, and whoever says you fool will be liable to the hell of fire." But I suppose that's one of the verses you're not supposed to take literally because reasons.
If you think that, you're an idiot. And they're pushing this propaganda, the moon. The Bible says, let the lesser light be for the night. I just love that, how God said, hey, this is the lesser light, and it's to rule the night.
Is this where you're going to explain why the moon counts as a light when it doesn't actually give off any of its own light? Or will you perhaps take a stab at the less noticeable error of the Bible saying that the moon rules over the night when the moon spends approximately as much time out in the daytime as it does the night?
So you can just have the cool of the night. And I imagine back in Bible days, they probably slept in tents. Sometimes I wish I was in Bible days. I love the outdoors. But you know, the moon is getting further and further away. And the moon, folks, I don't know if any of you know this, but the moon causes our tides.
Nah, tides go in, tides go out. Can't explain that.
Tide goes in, tide goes out. Never miscommunication. You can't explain that.
And it's getting further away. And so let's just use 1 million years. They say 6.2 billion, which is just insane. But let's just say 1 million years, for example. With the constant that the moon is moving away.
Is it a constant? Has it always been a constant? Did you take into consideration the fact that the moon was formed after the Earth, or at least joined the system after the Earth was fully formed?
We would have been flooded just 1 million years ago.
Who would have been flooded? The whole Earth? Do you think the moon somehow creates more water on Earth when it's closer? Or do you mean certain locations would have flooded more than they do today? I mean, I could agree with that, but all that does is say that the tidal patterns would have been different when the moon was in a different orbit. It doesn't actually do anything to suggest that the Earth-Moon system is young, and it has nothing to do with evolution, except perhaps that there would have been selection pressure towards adapting to the different tidal patterns that would have existed.
And the moon still causes tidal waves today.
Technically, yes, the moon does cause tidal waves, but I think you're confusing tidal waves for tsunamis, which are often erroneously called tidal waves. A tidal wave is just the movement of water due to a tide, so the slow inflow of water into the Bay of Fundy, which as tides go is actually pretty fast, is a tidal wave. Tsunamis, on the other hand, are usually caused by earthquakes or volcanic eruptions on the ocean floor.
It still causes but oh no, it's just so logical to believe in evolution. I think the Earth is just billions of years old.
Well, you haven't given me any reason to doubt that yet. You've just said that the tides would have been different 1 million years ago. And I'm prepared to agree with that. In fact, because of different geologic forces on the Earth itself, tides were very different from today even just a few thousand years ago. So what did the tides being different have to do with the Earth being young? How do different tides in ancient times mean the Earth couldn't have existed or evolution couldn't have happened? You're not connecting the dots very well.
I had an atheist tell me, oh, you don't believe we're related to that grass outside?
Was there a point in there, or was that just the argument from personal incredulity?
Hitler said if you can tell a lie big enough, loud enough, and often enough, people will believe it.
Which might be why Hitler used religion quite heavily in his regime. Congratulations, you won a whole 2 minutes before falling into Godwin's law.
And he says, if you can let me control the textbooks, I'll control the state.
And while I can't find anything specifically on the Nazis burning The Origin of the Species, the official Nazi library journal had 12 categories of banned books, and Category 6 is writings of a philosophical and social nature whose content deals with the false scientific enlightenment of primitive Darwinism and monism. So in his control of the textbooks, it looks like he specifically did not want evolution to be included in education.
And so what they've done is they've infiltrated, it's amazing. I don't like to get on the subject of evolution with atheists because they just freak out. They're like, oh my, I can't believe you don't believe in evolution.
That should be the appropriate response. Evolution is such a cornerstone of so many different scientific fields today that the idea of not accepting it should be surprising. Unfortunately, in my experience, the usual response to encountering someone who doesn't accept evolution is more along the lines of an apathetic, okay, you have your beliefs and I have mine, whatever.
Why would I? It's stupid.
So stupid that all the most intelligent people on the planet accept it. So stupid that several aspects of modern medicine rely on the truth of evolution to work. So stupid that we have taken control of evolution in some cases to create better breeds of food crops to feed millions more people than was possible even just 100 years ago. But yeah, tides were different in the past, so evolution is stupid.
You have to actually defy science. Oh, it's scientific. Well, what about this? Oh, I never thought of that. Oh, I never really even crossed my mind.
Ah, yes. The classic argument from that. I never thought of that. What is that? Don't worry about it, but it renders the cornerstone of modern medicine stupid. Great argument you've got there.
Because we live in a school where it's just fill in the blank, fill in the blank, fill in the blank.
Interesting. This guy is almost a decade younger than me. Have schools changed that much since I was a kid? Because I remember a whole lot of show your work in math class, explain your reasoning in English class, hypothesize and experiment to determine the accuracy of the hypothesis in science. Granted, history was a lot of fill in the blank and multiple choice, but it seems to me that that was the exception rather than the rule. In fact, I remember the big sigh of relief that would go through a class when it was announced that the next test would be purely multiple choice, because usually the tests involved a lot more thinking than is required for that. Though I would agree that schools don't teach logic and philosophy like they should, it's not like every class is just memorize these answers and that'll get you through.
They're not taught to logic. They're not taught to reason.
There were plenty of classes that had emphasis on explaining your reasoning when I was in school. But as far as logic goes, you do know that's not a verb, right? Obviously, you weren't taught how to English.
I thank God I was in a home where I at least got taught how to logic.
Okay, maybe he's got a point about the school system not working. If he got through English class, there's a problem. I think what you're trying to say is, taught how to think logically. I know it's easier to cut out a few words, but then you sound like a bumbling idiot. Unless, of course, you're trying to sound like a bumbling idiot to add emphasis to your point about the school system not being adequate. In which case, point granted.
You know? And you know what all these atheists have in common?
That they don't believe in God. Aside from that, I honestly have no idea. We're all so different. I mean, I disagree with almost all of my atheist friends about lots of things on a regular basis. But do go on, tell us what generalization you think that we all have in common, and I'll bet I can find several atheists that don't have that in common.
You know, they've been attacking us online. They put out a little 2-hour documentary trying to expose the one pastor and I put out, and Brother Brandon put out a 2-hour documentary. You know what all these atheists have in common? Video games.
What? I'm honestly not following you here. All atheists have video games in common, and that has something to do with the 2-hour documentary that the atheists put on about you? Are you sure you learned how to logic in your home? Because you're full of non sequiturs. And I'll just go ahead and tell you right now, I'm not much of a gamer. The most advanced gaming system I have ever owned is the one I currently own, the Nintendo Wii, and I just got it about a year or two ago when it was already 4 or 5 years out of date. Yes, I play video games. How often? A few hours a month, maybe. Do you know when I played the most video games? When I was a Christian. Not saying that all Christians have video games in common, but that's the way it worked out for me. I also asked about this on Twitter, and within seconds of posting, I received several responses from atheists who do not play video games at all. So please, tell us how video games lead to atheism, or how atheism leads to video games, or how video games and atheism both lead to violence, or whatever completely fallacious link you're going to make. Or just make it another non sequitur and move on to something else without ever explaining yourself. That'll work too.
They all play video games. And Harry Potter, you get on their channel, they're in fantasy land.
Well, I first got into Harry Potter when I was a Christian. I still enjoy it, but what's that got to do with anything? I'll tell you something most Christians have in common. They believe they'll go to heaven when they die. They're in fantasy land!
That's all they ever do!
That's all we ever do? I raise a family and go to work, which is actually the main reason I don't play video games. There's just no time left after that. Professor Stick works in Cancer Research Lab. Godless Engineer is, you guessed it, an engineer. Matt Dillhunty is a magician and a mentalist. Jackson Wheat is studying to become a biologist. Paula G is a software engineer. Godless Cranium is a fucking saint who works as an intervener for people who are both deaf and blind, so basically he helps them communicate and acts as their eyes and ears. And those are just who popped in my head within a few seconds of thought. So a bunch of very productive members of society who, according to you, all they ever do is live in fantasy land. I think you need to work on your narrative a bit.
They can't think for themselves. They sit back and they drink Coke all day and sit behind a video game system.
I don't like Coke unless there's rum in it. This would probably have been more accurate if you had said booze instead of Coke. But then I know atheists who won't touch booze, so you'd still be wrong. Not as wrong, but still wrong. You can say it as loudly and angrily as you want, but at the end of the day, you are still demonstrably wrong.
And then wonder why, you're crazy, Brother Powell, for believing in a creator. Oh, you're insane. No, you're crazy, and you need to get off the video game system, and somebody needs to preach to them the gospel of Jesus Christ, and so that they can be saved. That's what we need. And I'm sick and tired of these stinking video games messing with people.
I feel like this whole thing was one giant non sequitur. I mean, we could make a pretty awesome drinking game out of this. Go back, watch this video again, and every time he makes a non sequitur, take a shot. Now, I didn't point out all the non sequiturs, or all I would have said through this whole thing would have just been, hey, that was a non sequitur, so you're gonna have to pay attention, but, do a shot every time he does a non sequitur. What does evolution have to do with video games? And how do video games prove that evolution is a fraud? And what do video games have to do with the tides a million years ago, or the size of the sun a million years ago, or anything about evolution for that matter? This video shouldn't be titled Proof Evolution is a Fraud. It should be called Pastor Overgeneralizes when Talking About Atheists. I'm not sure how you thought this proved evolution to be a fraud when you didn't even bring up any point that had anything to do with evolution in the video, but anyway, it was fun. That's it for this one. Remember to follow me on Twitter and Facebook. Feel free to support me on Patreon. See you next time.